Okay, so some legal precautions a person can take when dealing with an abusive relationship. So I have a bunch of questions about a protection order, or what a lot of people call a restraining order. And so a lot of people think that when you go get a restraining order, you go to a police department, you walk in and you say, "Hi, I'm here for a restraining order," and the police department hands you a restraining order, and you walk away with a restraining order. And that doesn't exist. So a restraining order is a court process. And it's an application process. And so you don't necessarily have to have a open case with a law enforcement agency, but it is a process that you will go in front of a court commissioner or a judge. And so the way it works is there's an office in the basement level of the courthouse, and it is specifically for restraining orders. And so if you're interested in getting a restraining order, you would go down there and fill out the paperwork to apply for a restraining order. And so Women's and Children's Horizons has a person that they have on staff to help you through that paperwork, and she is housed down there. And so they will help you, what does this question mean or whatever, and then you fill out the paperwork. And so in addition to filling out names, addresses, kind of demographic information, you're also going to be asked to fill out a complete witness statement. And so the more detailed you can be, the better. And they're going to ask you to go through the whole situation. And so you're going to write down everything. When the person started contacting you, how they started contacting you. Was it through a social media site? Did they physically come to you? How did it escalate? How did it not escalate? How long did it stop and continue back up again? Physical stuff. Was there a relationship before or after? All that kind of stuff. And so the more information you can bring with you when you apply for the restraining order, the better your case looks. And by that, I mean, like, if you have screenshots of text messages between you and the other person, or screenshots of social media postings, or anything, absolutely anything that you can attach to that application, that's going to help your case immensely. So if you're going to go down and apply for a restraining order, you're going to want to bring that kind of stuff with you. Okay. And then you're going to write everything out, and then you're going to hand it in. And so you will when you hand it in, you're going to hand it back to the person who's in charge of the restraining orders. And then you're going to get assigned a court date. And the court commissioner is going to look at your information based on what you have. And the court commissioner will decide at that point, maybe that day. It just kind of depends on when you go down there, because they work Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. with an hour lunch in between. So if you go there at 4:45, you'll be able to turn your stuff in, but no court commissioner is going to see that paperwork until the next day. And so you're going to turn that paperwork in. A court commissioner is going to look at it, and based on the information that you provide, he or she will determine whether or not you get a temporary restraining order. And so it's out of your hands at that point. And so if you get a temporary restraining order, that gives you kind of a 72-hour no contact. Okay. And so what that does is that says there's enough of information in front of me in order to give you a court date to come and talk to me about it. That's really what it is. And so, so that temporary restraining order is good until you'll get a court date that you will appear in court and kind of plead your case. Okay. And so that temporary restraining order, referred to as a TRO, temporary restraining order, will be served to that other party. Until that other party has been served, until they have received that paperwork in their hands, that temporary restraining order is not in effect. So if you're handed the paperwork and you walk away and they have not been served yet and they text you, that's not a violation of a restraining order. You will be notified as a victim immediately when that restraining order has been served. And as soon as you are notified that that other person has been served a restraining order, that is when that goes into effect. And so from that point forward, that person is no longer allowed to contact you. And if they do, it's a violation of the restraining order. That being said, if you are the one who is asking for a restraining order on somebody else, if you contact that person after that restraining order has been put into effect, you are also violating that restraining order. Just because you took the restraining order out on somebody else doesn't mean that you are exempt. So neither of you can contact each other. You can't have friends contact each other. You can't social media, nothing. You cannot have contact with each other. If one or the other violates, then you're subject to, number one, your case getting thrown out, and number two, you're subject to arrest. Okay? So that's the temporary restraining order. That's like step number 2. Step number 1 is filling out the paperwork. Step number 2 is actually getting the 3-day temporary restraining order. So when that other person is served with the paperwork, he or she'll have the same paperwork as you do. You both have the same paperwork in front of you. That other person who's served with the restraining order has the option to come to that court date in 3 days. Okay? They don't have to appear. They do not have to appear. Their lack of appearance doesn't bode well for their case, of course, because that's the court giving that person an opportunity to state their side of the story. But it doesn't automatically make your restraining order valid. Okay? The judge still has the ability, even without the other person, the respondent there, that you as the petitioner who took out the restraining order, you still are subject to questions by the judge. And if after answering those questions, the judge does not feel that a restraining order is appropriate, he still has the availability to not grant the restraining order, even if the other person doesn't show up. Okay? And so I always tell people that, because getting a restraining order out on somebody is not only very serious, but you are going to have to face that person in court. And now, Women's and Children's Horizons, if you hook up with an advocate, they will come with you to that court appearance. So even if you don't have family members or friends or anything going with you, you have somebody who knows your story, who is in your corner, and who is helping you through the process. So you're never going through this alone, as long as you take advantage of the services available to you. So let's say the judge looks at the information, the temporary restraining order is in effect. You come back to the court date and the judge says, yep, I'm going to grant you a restraining order. Okay. So there are a couple of kinds of restraining orders. They're not all the same. So you have a 2-year restraining order, you have a 4-year restraining order, and you have a permanent restraining order. And so a 2-year is renewable in 2 years. Just because it expires in 2 years doesn't mean you can't re-up it. But in order to re-up a 2-year restraining order, you have to go back downtown and fill out the paperwork again. And so during that 2 years, if that other person violates a restraining order, anything, you are going to be documenting all of that, calling the police, documenting any arrests, any kind of weird things that are happening, keep getting hang-up calls, unknown numbers, block number, anything like that. You're going to document all of that. And at the end of that 2 years, you're going to be able to go back down, apply for another 2 years based on the information that you will let the judge know. So it doesn't automatically re-up itself. And so if you miss that date, and the date is today, and today is the last day the restraining order is in effect, and you have not gone down and done the paperwork and have another restraining order in effect starting tomorrow morning, actually technically at 12 a.m., that other person is free to contact you. Now, is it a good idea? No. Should you still call the police? Absolutely. But they're not violating a restraining order. So unless you have another temporary restraining order in place, or you have another actual restraining order that has been renewed, the day that that's finished, that's it. That other person is free to contact you without violating. So a 2-year, a 4-year, and the 2-year and 4-year are just specifically based on what the situation is. It's totally up to the judge. The Permanent restraining orders are very, very far and few between ordered, because people's situations change, people move, people get counseling, all sorts of things differ. And so the only times that judges do a blanket forever and ever are the cases where, like, the woman is in the hospital and can't even appear in court because she's been battered so badly, and this has happened 4 or 5 times, and there's no chance that this relationship is going to dissolve other than in harm to the victim. And so that's those are the kind of those only situations where the judge will say, forever, you're no longer allowed to have any contact with that person. I don't care what state you're in, I don't care what. Okay, so if you get a restraining order, as the respondent or as the petitioner, the one who took the restraining order out or applied for the restraining order, when you apply for a restraining order and you get the restraining order, you have the right to be in your space. And so the other person has to move. So for school and classes, so if you walk into the Brickstone and you have a restraining order out on somebody else who's already there eating, they are required to get up and leave. You are allowed to go in there. Now, there's a fine line between you are allowed to be in there and sit and eat versus you then become their stalker and you're just for fun walking into spaces to watch them leave. That could be turned against you, and the restraining orders can always be reversed. Just because you have a 2-year or 4-year doesn't mean that it's ironclad. If they petition a judge, they could have their case heard, and that would be a situation where they either take one out on you or your restraining order is now denied. And so you kind of got to be careful about that. And the whole point of getting a restraining order out on somebody else is for them to leave you alone. So it doesn't make sense to have a restraining order if you're the one who keeps trying to get back at them. It's not a retaliation. It's for your safety. That's the whole reason that they were created. And so when you have a restraining order, in order for it to be enacted, the law enforcement agency that you are in at the time have to have a copy of it. And so if you're on campus and you have a restraining order out against somebody else, whether they're on campus or they're off campus, you need to give us a copy of it. Because if you call us and you say, I have a restraining order out on this person and I see them and they're not leaving and they're staring at me or they're whatever they're doing, if we don't have a copy of it, I can talk to the person and I can go there and stand next to you and keep you safe, but I cannot arrest that person for violating the restraining order until I have that restraining order in my hand. And now that person is free to leave when they see me. I'm not going to arrest them because I don't have anything that says that they're doing anything wrong. So when you get a restraining order out on somebody else, you need to make sure that any municipality that you are in, if you go to school in one municipality, you need to let them have a copy of it. If you live in another municipality, if you go vacation, if you go away for the summer, if you go do an internship somewhere, carry copies with you, carry them in you with your car. If you go to state line somewhere and you happen to have to call 911 because you see them following you in the car in the interstate, have a copy with you and hand it to the cop and say, here's a restraining order. If you have it and they have it in their hands, they can turn around and do something about it, but they cannot do anything until they have it in their hands. And when time is of the essence and your safety is at risk, you want them to be able to act on it immediately as opposed to waiting for it to be faxed from whatever municipality it happens to be residing in. That's 14 minutes.
Okay. I was just going to